So during the climate debate earlier this week, Senator Bernie Sanders was asked a question about population control in the context of fighting climate change. So his answer, let's empower women and girls to make choices, to make their own choices in regards to family planning. Now, I talked about that yesterday. I actually broke down why the question itself was flawed, despite his answer being perfectly fine. And I also said that this is something that conservatives will attack him on. And of course, immediately it happened. On The View, host Meghan McCain accused the Jewish senator of supporting eugenics. Let's take a look.
Population growth is on the decline. The world's population is projected to nearly stop growing by the end of this century. And in all clarity, I think people know this, but S.E. Cupp is one of my closest friends, and I agreed with that. We were actually texting each other when this moment happened in the climate change debate, because I do think anytime you're talking about population control, if you're a pro-life person, it starts sounding alarms. Because again, like in China, they enacted a one-child policy, and now men outnumber women by 70 million in China and India.
But
I think for me, when you're talking about,
that's because they were throwing their children away.
But when you're talking about,
one of them is
disgusting.
my sister, by the way, who was left on the street at 2 months old. Megan, to your point, though, it's to your point. It's scary what happens when you do that.
This is not eugenics. Well, that's the thing. So you and Essie were.
I believe it's a slippery slope towards that. And I do think this dystopian, hellhole, nightmarish hellscape that Democrats are putting out, that climate change is just going to end everything to the fact that we're going to have population control in this country, seems very extreme.
That's not what he's doing. That's an absolute twisting of what he actually said. He said nothing about, we're going to force the government to put in population controls, force people to have only a one-child policy like China. No. If you actually listen to what he says, I want to empower women to make choices. Allow them to make the choice in how many children they have, not just here in America, but all over. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to let him explain it.
The answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. And the Mexico City Agreement, which denies American aid to those organizations around the world that allow women to have abortions or even get involved in birth control, to me is totally absurd. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
There was literally nothing wrong with that answer. Again, nothing about forcing people into population control or anything like that, and making sure that we forcibly abort. Because again, you listen to what S.E. Cupp and what Meghan McCain are saying. Oh, it's alarm bells because it's a slippery slope to leading to China and all this stuff, and it's going to be a horrible and the dystopian hellscape that they're talking about when it comes to climate change. I mean, that kind of rhetoric is just leading to extreme. No. It's absolutely ridiculous. All he talked about is expanding access to choice. Now, interestingly enough, Whoopi Goldberg, right? So Whoopi Goldberg is not a defender of Bernie Sanders, in general, right? In fact, you can go back just recently when Bernie Sanders was on The View, and she was confused, like, why don't you do something about Amazon? Bernie Sanders, pretty much, along with activists, was one of the only politicians that got Amazon to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour. He authored the Stop Bezos Act. And he's got another one out there, I think, just called the Bezos Act. But why don't you do something about Whoopi, why don't you actually learn what he does? Why don't you actually read into what he's been doing? And don't read, hit pieces in the Washington Post by Jennifer Rubin, okay? Don't read the hit pieces in the New York Times, okay? Actually look at some of the bills that he's done. He's got a website for his the Senate office, right? You can go and look in there, and it shows what he's done. He's got a website that shows what he wants to do. It's really easy. And not only that, but she's had issues with Justice Democrats, which I think is ridiculous, AOC, etc. So I've criticized her on those. But on this, Whoopi Goldberg is going to have a spectacular defense of what Bernie Sanders said here. Let's take a look.
But here's the thing. Whatever he has said, let's be clear about what he is saying. Yeah. Let's not make something up when it's not what he said. Because when you bring in eugenics, that's a different conversation. Yeah. That is the controlling of a population because you don't like the size of your nose, or they're too dark, or they have or their eyes aren't blue.
But it also disproportionately impacts minorities and people with disabilities.
Eugenics doesn't have anything to do with minorities or anybody else. And I will say this to you also. Think about all the women in Ireland who for years just wanted birth control. They just wanted birth control because they live in a Catholic country that said you cannot have it. They were having an insane amount of children. Yep. What these women fought for and pressed for and marched for was the right to make that decision for themselves. Yeah. I think that's clearly, and maybe I misinterpreted it, but when he says, I think especially in poor countries around the world where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, that's something I support. That's different than eugenics.
No, she didn't misinterpret it at all. That's exactly what he said. And so she's right. Now, what Whoopi Goldberg heard was what normal people hear. But Meghan McCain is going to go on after that to say, oh, that she hears Sanders when he says these things through the prism of a conservative. Oh, okay. So the prism of basically fear and loathing. I got you. Yes, I look, I can imagine from a conservative's perspective how women having bodily autonomy would be super scary. Oh my God, they can make their own choices. Oh, and how many children they have. No. Especially for a lot of these white conservatives, people who subscribe to, replacement theory. I'm not saying Meghan McCain subscribes to that, but I'm saying that there's a lot of these white conservative politicians, people like Steve King, who talks about, oh, we're being replaced, so we need to have more babies. White people need to have more babies, right? That's like the issue when you start talking about overpopulation or population with conservatives. That's why she brings up population is falling. Well, look, in a lot of modern industrialized countries, you do have lower population rates generally because people are more educated, they have more choices, and they choose to have less children. And that's fine. That's a choice of what they want. Now, in Japan, there is a little bit of an issue when you take it to a little bit more of an extreme where people are not having enough children to replace the current generation. That causes lots of problems when it comes to the social safety net systems, retirement, etc. But that's not what's happening here in America. So, and again, I addressed the whole climate thing. Look, climate. So, look, there's 71% of all emissions are created not by people having kids and personal choices. No, they're made by giant corporations. Okay. Now, family planning is a wonderful thing, but that is not the key to fighting climate change. Family planning is just allowing women to be able to make their own choices with their own bodies. Every person should be in favor of that. Every person should be in favor of that. Okay. But apparently not Meghan McCain, or when it comes to, making better choices in order to, protect the environment. As I said, that's not going to have a huge impact. Maybe it will have some impact, but again, until we deal with the 71% of all emissions created by these giant corporations that pollute and put out all this, pollution and carbon and methane, then we're not really going to solve the problem. Now, why don't conservatives see that? Why don't they talk about that? No, it's because they don't want to. Conservative politicians, of course, get funded by these giant fossil fuel companies. That's why they don't want to talk about it, because they make money. But the conservative voter, now that's interesting. That's an interesting question. It's maybe they don't want to believe in the facts, right? They don't believe in the facts. Facts are an inconvenience when it comes to their feelings. And their feelings are, well, liberals believe in climate change. I hate liberals. So I guess I don't believe in climate change. I mean, isn't it amazing that there's reports out there where there are men, specifically white conservative men, right, that feel that climate change is a woman's issue, and I mean that by not like that it's a like a women's issue, like for example, equal pay or the cost of women's feminine products. No, it means in the context of it makes you girly to recycle. Like, oh, it's so feminine to care about the environment. That there are people that were polled that said that they would be embarrassed to bring in a reusable bag to go shopping with because they think that it makes you more feminine. That explains the attacks on Greta Thunberg, right? The incredible misogynistic, horrible attacks on these, women who are speaking out in favor of doing something against climate change. That's what you're seeing from a lot of white conservative men. And again, the facts are inconvenient to their feelings. And unfortunately, the science has a liberal bias. They refuse to see the emergency that is climate change and the fact that it's costing us big time already and that it will cost us much more in the future. So we do have to do something. Population control and family planning, they're not the way to do it, but family planning ultimately is a great thing to do, and I definitely encourage it. Access to abortion, access to birth control, and of course, the big thing, education. But if you want to tackle climate change, you got to go after the big polluters. You got to go after the big corporations, agribusiness, and do something. And luckily, there are presidential candidates that have plans on that. One of them happens to be Bernie Sanders with the Green New Deal. So we got to do those big solutions to prevent what she said, the dystopian hellhole, etc. Future that we have waiting for us. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.